We got our own.
Okay. Okay, tough. So let's begin. Let's engage ourselves in a little bit of Torah this morning. We are on Masechet Beitzah Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet, I believe. No, Amud
Aleph.
Aleph. Amud Aleph.
What's the bottom?
Yeah. So we were talking about, that's right. So we were talking about again the sugya of Tfilat Kelim on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. Right, we saw in the Mishnah, we saw Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel who both agree that you should not do Tfilat Kelim on Shabbat. You should do it before. And the question was why. So we said we were going to see four reasons. So I'll just go back a second. We won't read the whole Gemara again, but at the bottom of Amud Bet, Yud Zayin Amud Bet, at the beginning of the Gemara it said the Kula Alma Miat Kli b'Shabbat Lo. So we don't tovel kalim on Shabbat. Why? Ma'itama. So we said we're going to say four different explanations. Reason number one, by the way, depending on which reason we accept, it's going to be a very, very big nafkamina nowadays in terms of whether we can tovel kalim nowadays on Shabbat. Remember, the Gemara here is talking about tvilat kalim from tuma to tahara. The tvilat kalim that we do nowadays is when you have a new kli, an old kli, which is purchased from a non-Jew, which is manufactured by a non-Jew, right? And it comes into the possession of a Jew, you have to go tovel it. So that's a different type of tvilah. Would that be permitted on Shabbat? Well, it's going to depend on which of the reasons that we accept. As we'll see, some of these reasons will still be relevant and some will not be. So, first reason, Amar Rabbah, right? Shema Yitlenu be'yado v'yaverena abamot be'reshut harabim. Right, Rabbi, excuse me, is concerned that you may take the kli and you may go and carry it, Dalet Amot, in Reshut Harabim. Right, this is because of carrying. By the way, another question we can ask is, would this apply? The Gemara will discuss. Would this apply to Tvilat Adam as well? You might say that if we're concerned about carrying Abamot B'Reshut Rabim, if a person goes, right, a person may have the water on them, they go and they carry Abamot B'Reshut Rabim, it might apply there as well. In any event, that was reason number one. So we saw the Gemara discussed. I said, if that's the case, what if you have a bor in your chatzir? What about Tefillah and Yom Tov? We said no, Tefillah and Yom Tov is also going to be asur out of Yom Tov atu Shabbat. And then we got into the whole question of Gzera li Gzera. Surely it seems like we are adding a Gzera to a Gzera. And if that's the case, if we're going to be machmir about Tfilat Kelim, then we should see this Gzera li Gzera should apply in other places as well. The Gemara brought 5 different challenges to that, and it rejected all 5. I won't go through them again, but it's just important to remember for the flow of the sugya that we had those challenges, and the Gemara rejected each one of them. Okay, if we go now a little bit, we're on Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph. We go a little bit, maybe the bottom third of the page, where it says Rav Yosef Amar Gzera Mishum Schita. Right, so this is reason number 2. So reason number 1 was Rabbi who said we're concerned about Shema Yavireno Dalet Amot B'Reshut Rabim. That was the first explanation. Second explanation here is Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says no, the Gzera is Mishum Schita. And we mentioned this right at the end, that schita is forbidden. That's when you squeeze and you have something and you squeeze out the water, right? So that may be the malacha of dash, of threshing. It may be related to the malacha of melaben, of laundering. But either way, it's agreed that schita is forbidden on Shabbat. So we're worried if you're going to come and you're going to toivel your kalim, you might come to squeeze them and squeeze out the water, right? Obviously, if you're thinking of clothes and materials and things like that, there it would apply. If this is, by the way, if this is the reason, so then nowadays it would not apply, right? When we toivel our pots and pans and knives and forks, etc., there's no squeezing. Those are not. It's not that kind of material. So the Gemara says, hang on. Says Rav Yosef Amar Gzera Mishum Schita. Amalei Abaye Teinach Kelim Divnei Schita Ninu. Right? Abaye says that makes sense when we're dealing with those kinds of kelim, clothes, materials, that sort of thing, where schita could apply. Kelim delav b'nei schita ninu, mai kalamema. What are you going to say about kelim where there's no schita? Answers the Gemara, Amalei Gzera Ani Atu Ani. Right? It's a Gzera of these because of these. Right? Similar to what we saw before. So then says the Gemara, hang on a second, if you're going to say it's a Gzera Ani Atu Ani, so that's similar to Gzera li Gzera, right? So we're going to ask all the same questions that we asked before. Don't worry, the Gemara's not going to bring them all again. It just says, Itvei kohane tiyuvta. So we challenge all those challenges which we raised above, those 5 questions. And we give the same answer. Okay, so it's basically copy and paste from the beginning of the daf until now. But that is the challenge on Rav Yosef, and there it is rejected. Okay, opinion number 3. Opinion number 3 is Rav Bibi. Rav Bibi Amar Gzera Shema Yashhe. Okay, Rav Bibi says no. We're worried. Let's just see Rashi before that. Rav Yosef Amar. Rashi near the bottom says Rav Yosef says. Talmud Manitin Tfilat Kelim Shabbat V'Yom Tov Asira Mishum Schitat Begadim She'afen Bichlal Kelim. Right, Rav Yosef said the reason why you can't toivel kelim on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Now again, by the way, what's the advantage? The advantage of these reasons, perhaps, of the reason of Rabbah, is that it applies equally to Shabbat and Yom Tov. Remember, the Gemara asked before about Rabbah, said it's Dalil Amot B'Shut Rabim, okay, but then we said on Yom Tov there's no Isur of carrying, so we said we had to make a Gzerah of Yom Tov to Shabbat, and then we had the whole discussion. So yeah, you don't have to get into the Gzerah of Yom Tov to Shabbat because it's it applies equally. But so Rashi just points out that schitat, there's a concern here of schitat b'gadim, that those are also included in kelim. Rashi is reminding us, maybe we have a tendency when we read the Gemara, we say kelim, we forget that it's also talking about those things where there's schita. Okay, now Shema Yasheh. What does Shema Yasheh mean? Shema Yasheh, this is Rav Bibi's reason. He says you might keep it, i.e., before Yom Tov, everything has to become tahor again. But you might have something which you were going to take to the mikveh, but not yet. You're going to wait. You're going to take it a little bit later. You'll take it on Yom Tov, right? Erev Yom Tov is busy. You have to make your Erev Tavshilin. You have to do this. You have to do that. You have to do all these things. And you're busy cooking. You think, the tefillah will do later. So what's going to happen? You're going to leave these kelim which are tar in your house, and oops, something else is going to become tameh. You're going to touch this. You're going to touch that. Right? And it's going to cause a takala. So in order not to get into that situation, just don't leave the tumah lying around in your house. Go and do the tefillah before Yom Tov, right? Do it even before your Erev Tavshilin. So he says, Shema Yesheh, says Rashi, if we're going to allow you to wait and to toivel something on Yom Tov, so Mashilo ad Yom Tov Shu Pano, you're going to wait until Yom Tov when you're free, right? When you're not busy. And you're going to come to a takala while lishtamesh ben betruma. You're going to forget. It's going to be on Yom Tov. You're going to have this kli and that kli, and okay, you're going to put truma in the wrong kli, and then oops, it's not like when it's or it is if you have meat and milk or whatever, you have the wrong kli and you make a mistake. Okay, so that's what we're concerned about when it happened. By the way, Rashi points out here. Why would you leave it until Yom Tov? You say Ad Yom Tov Shu Panui, and we see this idea that in many cases, also regarding Yom Tov, also regarding Chol HaMoed, that Chachamim were very stringent. They said a person shouldn't leave things to be done. A person shouldn't say so it's called Mechaven Melachto LaMoed. That a person has to, I don't know, you have to take your car for a test. You have to go and fix something, whatever it is. So a person says, okay, I'm going to wait until Chol HaMoed. That's the time when I'm free. Then I have a lot of time, and that's when I'm going to go do the malacha. Absolutely not. Chachamim say that is forbidden. Same thing by Yom Tov. You can't do that. You have extra free time on Yom Tov and Chol HaMoed. You need to use that free time for Limud Torah. You need to use it for the things that Yom Tov is given for, but you can't use it to perform your own activities, and therefore you shouldn't treat that as just some extra free time. Okay, so we've seen three reasons so far. Rabbah said we can't toivel the kelim because you might come to carry them for Amot B'Reshut Rabim. Rav Yosef said we're concerned about schita. Okay, and both of those answers we saw Gzerah Ha'atuha. Then Rav Bibi said no, it's because Shema Yasheh. You can't. Chachamim said you have to come and toivel the kelim before Yom Tov, otherwise you're going to leave it, you're going to have a takala. Now clearly this reason of Shema Yasheh would not apply nowadays, right? Nowadays, when we're not dealing with Tumah and Tahara, that's not the issue. So this reason would not apply. So it says Rav Bibi Amar Gzera Shema Yasheh, Tanya Kvatei Rav Bibi. Well, we have a baraita that teaches according to his opinion. Kli שנדמה מערב יום טוב, אין מטבילין אותו ביום טוב, גזירה shema yasher. Okay, so there you have it explicitly. A kli, which became tamei before Yom Tov, you cannot toiv on Yom Tov, you have to do it beforehand, gzera shema yasher. Okay, in answer number 4, finally we have Rava, right, as opposed to Rabbah with a hey, was the first answer, he has Rava with an aleph, right, Rava amar, mipnei shenir'eh kimetaken kli. Interesting, we've already seen this idea in Rashi before, but Rava says, because it looks like metaken kli. Right? Metaken kli is going to be an Isud Rabbanan on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. Maybe, as we said before, maybe it's related to Boneh, maybe it's related to Makeb Patish, right? But it's an Isud Rabbanan that you can't fix something, you can't make something fit for use, right? So if you have this kli, which right now I cannot use it because it's tamei, and now I'm going to go into Toivlet, so it's going to be tahor. That looks like, Rabbanan said, that looks like metaken kli, and therefore that's going to be asur. Now this reason, if this is the reason we accept lalacha, so nowadays it would also be forbidden to do tvilat kelim on Yom Tov, because it's also nireka metaken kli. Right now I can't use the kli because I haven't toivled it. Now I can, right? So depending on, as you've seen, depending on which of the four reasons we accept, right? The reason of Rabbah, which that we're concerned you're going to carry in Arba Mod Bershut Rabim, that still applies. The reason of Rav Yosef that it's because of Shchita, that does not apply. The reason of Rav Bibi that it's Shema Yosher does not apply. And the reason of Rava that it's a Nira Kamtak Kli does apply. So the first and the last one do apply to Atvilat Kelim. Nowadays, the middle two don't. So we'll ask, we'll see what the Shulchan Aruch says in terms of nowadays whether you can do Tvilat Kelim on Yom Tov and on Shabbat, but certainly when it comes to Man Torah, you cannot, and we've seen 4 different reasons, 4 different explanations as to why that is. Rashi just says, Rav Amar says, Tamad Manitin V'Mnei Shenirek Metakin Kli V'Damya L'Takanat Melacha. It's like similar to performing a Melacha, V'Gazur Alei Mid Rabbanan, and therefore Rabbanan decreed against it. Okay, so now says the Gemara ask a question on that final reason. According to Rava, who says says the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom, says if that is the case, Adam Nami, then it should be the same thing with the person. It should be the same thing that just as the person was Tamei and now they're Tahor, in the same way that you can't toivel the Kli. So a person can't go into the mikveh. So answer the Gemara, Nir'eh Adam Nir'eh Kamekar. With a person it's different because the person looks. So now says the Gemara, hang on a second. If we have a clean water, right, says Rashi, that's the water that you would normally go and you would wash in, or you would go and cool yourself off in, right? But what if you only have Maim Ra'im? Obviously Maim, which is still, we're not getting into Chot Mikvaot now, but Maim, which is still, it's not so great, it's not so clear, it's still kosher for a mikvah, but it's not there. So Mai Kalameima. So Marav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Pamim Shadam Ba B'Sharav over the Amud. Person comes and it's very, very, very hot. And he'll go to cool himself off. He'll go even into water which is Mei Mishleh, water which has been soaked. Says Rashi Shesholina Pishtan Ba'em. That flax has been soaked in this water. This water's a bit dirty, but a person doesn't care. He wants to cool himself off. That's fine. Right? This water has a bad smell because of the Pishtan that's been soaked in it. Okay, that works in the summer, that works when it's very hot outside, but what about when it's raining? A person goes, again, our question is, if a person's going to the mikveh, the whole point is that we said you can't toivel your kelim, and seemingly you wouldn't be able to toivel a person as well, toivel yourself, because it's near it appears like you're doing it for the purposes of making some of that tikkun. So it says when you go into the mikveh, the person, it doesn't necessarily look like it because it looks like you're just going in to wash yourself, to cool off. Okay, only looks like that if it's good water. So we said no, maybe it's very hot. Say okay, that works when it's very hot. What about when it's raining, when it's cold? So Marav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Sometimes a person's been through the field, right? If you're on a kibbutz, for example, and you've been milking the cows on Shabbat or whatever it is, right? You come in, you're full of mud and you're full of dirt or whatever. So then you want to go, you want to wash yourself, even if it's in the winter. Okay. Tinach b'Shabbat. So this is very interesting. Now says the Gemara, says, I understand on Shabbat. What about on Yom Kippur? Let's just understand the question. The Gemara here is asking the question relating to Yom Kippur, mitzad, the yisod that it looks like a melacha, right? We're not discussing there is on Yom Kippur there's a separate prohibition of inuyim, right? And a person is not allowed to go and wash. That is separate. Lemaise, practically speaking, we may come to the conclusion that on Yom Kippur you can't because of inui. But we're not asking that question here. We're asking the question out of the side of melacha, the fact that it's nireh kemetaken kli, right? So on Shabbat, I can say, well, it looks like a person's just going to wash themselves. Or on Yom Kippur, it doesn't look like a person's just going to wash themselves because you wouldn't do that. So how can you say that it's allowed in terms of melacha? Right? Sometimes people get confused about this. It's interesting. I had a number of questions actually right on Yom Kippur, which wasn't that long ago. There's certain things people want to know. People feel that Yom Kippur is more stringent than Shabbat. So it's true that it's more stringent in terms of inuyim and eating and drinking and other things that we can't do. But in terms of melacha, there is no difference whatsoever between Shabbat and Yom Kippur. Any melacha that you cannot do on Shabbat, you can't do on Yom Kippur. And any melacha that would be permitted on Shabbat, right? Because it's not actually melacha, but that would be permitted on Yom Kippur as well. So that's what the Gemara says. Yeah, says, we don't have a difference. We don't find that there's something that's allowed on Shabbat, but it's asur on Yom Kippur, even though intuitively we think of Yom Kippur differently. But in terms of melachot, that would be the same. So therefore, if there is no isur melacha for a person to go and bowl in the mikveh on Shabbat, that would apply on Yom Kippur as well. However, as we said, there's a separate issue. There's a separate issue of the inui of an isur rechitza on Yom Kippur, and therefore that would not be. So don't go to the mikveh on Yom Kippur. Okay, but that is. But that's what the Gemara says. So we said midi de b'Shabbat shali b'Yom Kippur asur ela ho'ilu b'Shabbat shali b'Yom Kippurim nami shari. Rather, we say that since it's allowed on Shabbat. And again, I can't emphasize this enough, but mitzad melacha, right? Since it's allowed on Shabbat, we say that it's allowed, therefore, on Yom Kippur as well. Now, interestingly, the Gemara now gets into a discussion because it says all of this was only according to the reasoning of Rava, right? Rava was the one who started off and said it's nireh kemetaken kli, and that's how we got into the whole discussion. So Rava answers and he says, since it's permitted on Shabbat, it would be permitted on Yom Kippur from that aspect. And now says the Gemara, mi idlei Rava hoil. Who says that Rava subscribes to this principle? What is the principle of hoil? Hoil, the word literally means since. We use it in different contexts in Hilchot Shabbat, Hilchot Yom Tov as well. But in other words, the fact that you're making this comparison between here and there, since it's allowed over here, therefore it's going to be allowed over there. Right? The Gemara is going to say, does Rava subscribe to that principle? And we'll bring a proof, not necessarily comparing Shabbat and Yom Kippur, but comparing two cases. When you say that it's allowed in case A, it's going to be allowed in case B as well. Not so simple to say that Rava subscribes to that. Have a look. The Gemara says like this: Mi de Rava hoel v'hatnan. Here is our challenge. We have a Mishnah that says the following: Hatnan achoshesh b'shinav lo yigma ben et hachometz aval metabel hu kedarko v'nitrape nitrape. Okay, we have the Gemara that talks about, we have a number of Mishnayot which discuss medicines, remedies, etc. on Shabbat. We know that there is an isur of medicine on Shabbat. Okay, there is actually, it stems from the Gzerat Chachamim, the Gzera of Shchikat Samamanim. Nowadays, when you go and take medicine on Shabbat, very few and far between are the people that are going to go into the garden and take the herbs and start grinding them and making their medicines. Thankfully, that's not the way we have our medicines anymore, but that's the way it was once upon a time. So therefore, Chazal said that if you are taking medicine on Shabbat, you're going to come to grind your own medicines, right? And that's going to be an issur. However, that was the Gzera which they made, but that was the Gzera on a healthy person. Okay, just a bit of background. There are three categories of people on in terms of health and sickness when it comes to Shabbat, other areas of halacha as well. There is a choleh sheyesh bo sakana, person who is dangerously ill. Okay, choleh sheyesh bo sakana, we know pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh, the person you can do whatever you need to do. You can do malacha in order to save that person's life, to make them healthy. Then you have a choleh she'ein bo sakana, right? Choleh she'ein bo sakana means a sick person, but there is no danger. So somebody has an infection, whatever it is, they're not going to die, chas v'chalila, but they are classified as sick. Generally speaking, and how do we classify? How do we determine whether one is a choleh or not? So one of the definitions is nafal mishkav. Certainly a person who can't get out of bed, right? That would be considered a sick person. Now, and then the third category is what's called mechush ba'alma. Mechush ba'alma means somebody who's basically healthy. They have a slight ache, a slight pain, they have maybe a headache, whatever it is, but nothing serious. They wouldn't be classified as sick, okay, or as ill, I should say. So the gzeira against taking medicine was only for a healthy person. Chazal said somebody who has a mechush ba'alma cannot take medicine because they were worried you're going to come around. In a person who's already classified as a choleh, they are allowed to take their medicines. That's why somebody has an infection, has a whatever, antibiotics, whatever it is, on Shabbat can still take their medicine as usual. You know, where the question comes up is if somebody is healthy, basically healthy, they have a slight headache or something like that. Again, once you have a fever, you're defined as ill. But if there's a slight headache, a slight thing, can they take a tablet? So that's where Shaila comes up. The truth is that nowadays there's probably a lot more room to be lenient because the reasoning behind the Gzerah doesn't apply at all. But that's a separate discussion. But in any event, so the point is that a healthy person is not allowed to take medicine. So here, what the Mishnah says like this: is a choshesh b'shinav. Somebody has pain, who's worried about their teeth. Right? So the way they would do it in those days is that they would swallow vinegar. That is the remedy. So yeah, the question is, you're doing something. You're not making medicine. You're not taking medicine. You're taking a normal food, but you're doing it in a way that it's for the sake of medicine, for the sake of refuah. So the Mishnah says like this: you cannot go now and swallow vinegar because that's obvious that you're doing that for medicinal purposes. Nobody does that. Aval metabelu kedarko. But if you can take your food and you can dip it in vinegar and you can eat normally, right? If it happens to be that it was good for you medicinally, okay, so very good. But the point is, you have to do it in such a way that looks like you may be eating normally. So it doesn't look like you're taking a refuah Shabbat. Okay. So that is one Mishnah. Now we have another Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, Varamina alei, or maybe a Baraita, right? That's the Gemara in Shabbat over there brings the following case. It says lo yigmau polet, aval megameu bolea. Okay, so you cannot swallow and spit out, right? Well, right, like gulp down the vinegar and then spit it out because that is going to be obvious that you're doing it for health reasons. Aval megameu bolea, but you can swallow it. You can take this. So what do you see? You see in the first case, the Mishnah says lo yigma chometz, and the second one says you can swallow, right? So long as you swallow it and you don't spit it out. So that's a contradiction between the two cases. Amar Abaye says kitna nami matnitin. Megamel polet. So Abai says no. So the first Mishnah that we saw, that's also talking about the case where not where you swallow, but where you spit it, you gargle and you spit it out as well. For Rav Amar afilu tema megamel polet, and Rava says no. You could even say that the first Mishnah is talking about a case where you do swallow it. Velo kasha kan kodim tibur kan lachar tibur. Okay, the case is whether the difference between the cases is whether you've already dipped your food and eat, whether you've already eaten or not, right? So Rashi says, yeah, kodem tibul. Kodem tibul means kodem achila, before a person has eaten, megamel bolea. You could, before you've eaten, so you could swallow the vinegar. So you might think that it's just because he likes vinegar, he wants to eat it. The lo muchach milta de refuah, because there it's not obvious, not definite that it's doing it for that reason. Because you might say, he's doing it, that's going to help him swallow, it's going to help him, he's having the vinegar to avoid indigestion, I don't know. Right? That's what they would do. But if you've already eaten and you've dipped your food in vinegar, and then you're going to go and swallow the vinegar, so then it's obvious that you're doing it for that reason. So now here comes the question. It says ve'im ita, if it's true, if what's true. Again, how did we start all of this? We start all of this by saying that Rava subscribes to this principle of hoil, that since it's allowed in case A, it's going to be allowed in case B, or vice versa. Im ita, nema hoil v'kodim tibul shali, lachal tibul nami shali. So then you should say, since you say that it's allowed before you've dipped your food, you should say it's allowed after you've dipped your food. But we see here Rava is the one who doesn't say that. Rava's the one who doesn't say, and therefore, what do we have to say? We have to say, Hada be Rava mehai. We say, no, Rava changed his mind. The point is, again, we'll go over this tomorrow, but the point is he still subscribes to that position of hoil, and therefore, Rava's position still stands that the reason you cannot toivel kelim on Shabbat and on Yom Tov is because it looks like mitzaken kli, and that would have been the reason why a person can't go into the mikveh either. But we say ultimately at the end of the day, nireka meikar, it looks like you're just cooling yourself off, you're going to wash, and therefore it's allowed. And we said for mitzad melacha, it would be allowed on Yom Kippur the same way it's allowed on Shabbat. Mitzad inoi, it would not be allowed on Yom Kippur, but mitzad melacha be allowed the same because it says principle of hoil. And even though it seems that Rava contradicts himself regarding this principle of hoil by this case of the vinegar and on Shabbat, right? At the end of the day, there's no way to resolve it. It is a contradiction. And the only way the Gemara can resolve it says Hada be Rava Me'ai. It says no, Rava changed his mind. That's the only way. Okay, so that's where it leaves us. Tomorrow we'll look. I wanted to get there, but we didn't have time today. But we'll look a little bit at the Shulchan Aruch in terms of what he says nowadays, contemporarily speaking, regarding Tvilat Adam and Tvilat Kelim on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Okay, Adkan, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Good luck, everybody.